All right. Welcome to Hustle Estate from good old New Jersey. I'm one of your hosts, Isaac Gilman.
And I'm your co-host, Ed Hendrickson.
Today we're going to talk about two topics. Ed's had an unfortunate experience in the eviction process, and I have had some mixed experiences with the Airbnb process and putting a property on Airbnb. So we're going to start with Ed. Ed, you talked to me a little bit about the eviction process earlier today and in the past, but tell us a little bit about kind of your story related to having the tough discussion and tough process of evicting a tenant.
So basically what happened was I had a tenant, and it was like a mother and daughter that were living together, and the daughter and mother were kind of getting behind on their bills, and it happened at the same time that the daughter's boyfriend was able to move in with them. So it's up to that point they were just very slow on getting me rent, but they were paying. They were just constantly late. And when the boyfriend moved in, it was his responsibility now to pay rent. Now, not officially, he just came over and basically said, I'm going to pay rent from now on, don't ask them. And I said, hey, look, it doesn't matter to me. It is their responsibility at the end of the day. Let him know, because it does fall on them. They signed the lease. So it just, same thing, first couple months actually, like, boom, I was getting paid. I was like, this is great. And then 1 month, they were late again. Next month, they were late again. I just felt, here we go again, right? And then it was probably like 2 or 3 months of being late and me just constantly saying you were late. They didn't pay. They just didn't pay rent that month. And when I got to the point where, hey, you guys, are you going to pay again? He said, basically, oh, tomorrow, and it just became this huge tomorrow thing. And I probably let it go, I would say maybe it fell into the second month, maybe the mid of the second month. So now I'm behind 2 months of rent, and we had to start the eviction process then at that point.
So they're behind on a few months of rent. You've tried to work with them a little bit, and you understand it's not an easy process.
Yep.
So what did you do to kind of prepare for this process? What was something, this is going to be tough, and this is going to be a tough discussion, and may, be a legal issue as well.
Yeah.
What were some of the things that you began to prepare to go through this?
Well, what I did first was I had a mentor at the time who had owned some real estate, and I know he had done some evictions. So I called him and asked him, what do you normally do? And it was his...
Is this a lawyer, just a mentor?
No, he was just the mentor. He just a guy who owned a couple properties, basically. I mean, he had a 20-unit building. And he had suggested to me to call an attorney who we both were familiar with. I called him, and he told me, I'm not a tenant landlord specialist, that basically I could represent you, but I'm not an expert in this.
Got it.
I said, okay, well, I need somebody who can help me. So he passed me on to somebody else who specialized in this, and I explained to her my whole entire process. And I actually just kept having conversations with her. I kept calling her every day and just saying, hey, so how does this part work, or how does this part work? And she finally said, she was like, a lot of people would pay me a lot of money for all the stuff I've taught you, because she basically, I never officially hired her. But she told me that just go ahead and do it yourself. So she taught me how the whole process works. So go ahead and do it yourself, that you can basically handle it and you'll be fine.
So how long, so you start talking to this attorney, how long, and the tenants are already a few months, 2.5+ months behind now. How long did that take?
It was probably like a week or two of us talking. And again, now me just getting...
So you're close to 3 months behind on rent at this point.
2 full months
2 full
behind.
months.
So they owe the third, they're about to owe the third month.
Got it. Okay. So you begin this process, and what's, what was that process like? I mean, I imagine it was difficult. What was difficult both about the process and, having to evict somebody?
I mean, it definitely wasn't fun from the standpoint of, you're kicking somebody out, right? I mean,
right.
I know obviously everybody, there's probably nobody that enjoys doing it, but so it was just tough from that, finally saying, hey guys, look, I'm sorry, I've exhausted, all of my trying with you guys. I'm going to evict you.
And you don't have many properties.
This is it.
What, one? This is your only rental property, right?
So I'm living in that in part of the property, and my tenants are living in another part of the property. So that was the other hard part. You see them every day.
Right.
When you're going out to your car, you see them. You know they haven't paid rent. They know they haven't paid rent, and it gets awkward, when that stuff's going on. So that was kind of
And you're paying a
weird.
mortgage
And I'm
on this
paying my
property?
mortgage.
Yep.
Exactly. So luckily, I'm not falling behind, and it's one thing, it was good that I was able to stay on top of it, but that really does impact other people. If they're not getting the rent, they can't make the mortgage payment.
Right.
And then it's just a trickle down effect, and
Right.
it's starting to impact a lot of people. So I'd say that was the hardest thing, was just going and saying, hey, look, I'm like just breaking down, getting to the breaking point of, I'm doing this. Like, enough is enough. Like, you guys are not trying anymore. That was probably one of the hardest parts. And then just just learning the process and going through it on my own. I mean, I did have a couple people talking to me, but I didn't have just an attorney doing everything. I was reading about it. I was going down to the town, making sure I filed the paperwork correctly, because you have to file the paperwork correctly or it doesn't count. So just that process, going through and learning.
And how long? So like, how did you start filling out paperwork? Like, how long did that process take?
So you have to file. The first thing I had to file was basically you send them what's called it's really a notice to quit. So you're just notifying them, hey, officially, like, you did not pay your rent. I'm starting this eviction process. Once I did that, I went down to the town and filled out the paperwork. And there were some nice people there that helped me out. After probably the second or third time I went, because at first it was like, fill this out, you leave, and you're like, wait, I don't even know what I'm doing. That paperwork process, honestly, was fairly easy. And I would just tell people it's not really that daunting to do. You can do it on your own. It's just having the willingness to go do it.
Right. It's not an easy process.
Yeah.
So, okay, so overall, like, you filled out the paperwork and then
So you send a notice
somebody,
to quit,
or?
you file the paperwork, then the town will then send both me and the tenant a letter formalizing now that the court knows rent wasn't paid and gives us a court date. So the way they did it was, there was like every 2 weeks they had court. So when you filed, like if you filed by Thursday, the following Friday, you could go to court, but if you filed by Friday, you had to wait
A week.
a whole nother Friday
Okay.
to come. So basically then it was 2 weeks before you were allowed to go to court. So now we're just sitting waiting. They got the paperwork and they called me and were like, what? Why'd you do that? And now I had to cycle back. Like, we talked about this. I told you guys I was going to do this. We've been completely open about this. And then it becomes, can we start a payment plan? We'll give you $500 here and there. And at the time I said, sure, give me $500. Like, I want something now. And they just never gave me the money. They never gave me any money. Up until like the night before, he knocked on my door and was like, he had like $500 cash. I was like, will you take this? And I just said, no way. I'll just see you at court tomorrow. Like, I'm just beyond this. Let's go to court and handle it officially. So that was it. Next morning, we went to court and started the whole
The actual
in-court
eviction
room.
process.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And so, like, you go through this process, and it's not an easy process for both parties.
Right.
But like, what's something that maybe you didn't anticipate that if you ever have to do this again, hopefully you don't. I don't think any landlord really wants to go through this process. Right. I know I have a tenant. I don't want to do that. What would you do differently? How would you prepare next time so that if you do have to go through this tough process again, it's, you understand it, maybe you can help the tenant next time? What's something you would do differently?
I would really take so I'm not living in the property anymore, fortunately. I still have the property, but I would so the emotions are kind of out of it. I would just say, and it has since happened, that I kind of went through this portion of the process, was that tenant was late. I called, didn't get an answer. Finally spoke, said they were going to send the rent, didn't get it. A week later, called, and then I basically was just like, all right. I told them I'm filing right away, and I filed as soon as they got the court papers. They mailed me a check for the whole entire amount. So that went down a lot easier.
Okay.
But it was quicker. So I think that I would just be a little bit more forceful, or just start the process right away.
Just be
I don't want
clear.
to. If they're late 3 days, I'm not going to freak out. But if they're late a full, basically when any of my tenants now are late, I call and say, hey, is everything okay? If they say, yeah, sorry, I put the
So you're
check in,
doing your
whatever.
due diligence, right?
Yeah.
You want to make sure, hey, maybe something happened.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm certainly not going to just throw somebody out if they're having, if something really happened.
Right.
Right. And if they just say, hey, look, I'm sorry, I put in the mail on the 3rd or the 4th, whatever, no big deal. Or they say, oh, I forgot, and I put in the mail that day or the next day, that's okay. A week later, I'll follow up again. And at that point, now we're 15 days late, I will tell them that
like,
I'll begin something.
Okay. All right. And so if you had to kind of start all over and thinking about it from a little different perspective, if you got to start all over, what's something that maybe you would try to identify in selecting the tenants to help maybe avoid issues like eviction altogether, right? Like, is there something that you would maybe do in the checking of like their information that would help identify an issue of potential eviction or not payment, basically?
So what I would probably do in the future, in this case, I didn't really have the chance. I inherited the tenants from when I bought the property.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. But just knowing the profile, just so you guys know, it was an adult and an adult child. So the child of the mother that was living there was in their 20s. Probably going forward on that, I would make sure both of them were on the lease and run credit on both of them.
Okay.
Because it really became down the mother lost the job and the daughter didn't even go to work to try to help. So I would have wanted to know a little bit more about the other tenant. So since then I have done that. I actually have a family living on the property now, and it was the father and the mother of the family. Checked, ran them both, and they both combined. They were both working. They both had good credit. Everything, made sense. So I would make a decision not just based off the one tenant that's signing, based off whoever's going to be living there. Because a lot of times you only have to qualify, or my experience from renting is they just want one person to qualify, even though two adults might live there.
Gotcha.
I kind of want to know the profile of both adults.
Yeah, understand your tenants. Just understand your tenants a little bit more. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Cool. Trying to make the best informed decision.
Exactly.
All right. Very cool. I think we're going to take a short break, and then we'll get to my Airbnb experience, and Ed will play host.
I will. Awesome.
All right.
We'll be back. All right, guys, we're back. Thank you for sticking with us. So in this portion, we're going to talk about Airbnb and Isaac's experience with Airbnb. So Isaac, tell me if I remember correctly when we talked about it. You were living in Detroit, you had a condo, and your job was moving, or you were able to work remotely, basically, and you moved back to Brooklyn, and you had to do something with your apartment. So you tried to rent it for a little while, and then you decided to go Airbnb. So tell us a little bit about how you got to Airbnb.
Yeah, so Airbnb was definitely, at least at first, was not my first choice. I moved at the beginning of October last year in 2017, and thinking about how the weather works in Michigan, I didn't know if I would be able to rent it after October, because November, basically winter begins, and sometimes winter begins in October in Michigan. So I put it on the market in mid-October. I kind of ran a little later than I wanted because of some code issues related to rental requirements in Detroit. But anyway, I got a property management company and a real estate company to list it mid-October. Had a few looks, and ultimately didn't really get anybody to really pull the trigger on a lease. I had a few people get pre-qualified, but I was kind of disappointed, to be honest. But then, honestly, it was on the market for about a month and a half, and by the end of November, winter came. And I was like, I don't think this is going to happen. So I decided to transition it to Airbnb, which I had thought about before, but I ultimately thought it would be way too much work. And I was like, you know what, a traditional rental seemed to make sense with a property management company involved. So and the place was empty. I decided to buy some IKEA furniture and kind of turn it into a very minimalistic Airbnb place for really the start of the new year. So like I got all these things. I took a trip back to Detroit in early December. I spent literally every day for an entire week outside of normal work hours, going to IKEA, going to Salvation Army. I bought some things on Amazon, like a mattress, a few bed frames, as well as IKEA. Put it all together, got it out on the market like right before Christmas time, and it started to rent. Honestly, I almost booked up all of December, or the rest of December and all of January before I even knew what to do.
Wow.
Yeah. So
it must have been pretty crazy.
It was. It was way more successful than I ever thought. I was pricing it kind of low. I was pricing it around $50 a night in a really popular area in Detroit, in Midtown Detroit. But it was like the dead of winter. It's snowing. The weather's horrible. So I was like, It's new to Airbnb. It's horrible weather. It's a great location, but because the weather's so bad, I don't think that matters as much. And so I did rent it a little on the lower side, $50 a night on the weekdays, $75 on the weekends, with the thought that over a month or so after I get some reviews under my belt, I would raise the prices, especially as the weather warmed up and things got nicer. Unfortunately, I had to eventually take it down faster than I wanted to, but I think you wanted to kind of ask some questions around that, but ultimately, it was a good experience, but
Good.
It was interesting.
Good. Real quick, so you said that you were renting it for $50 a night and 75 on the weekends. Now, with that being booked up, how would that have compared to actually your monthly rent that you were, looking to get?
At that time, I wouldn't have covered my mortgage. It would have, partially because I wasn't booking it every single night. I did want at least one day of turnover. But I also wanted to be able to stay there when I would come into town for work. I still work for a company out there, and so I wanted to kind of have that flexibility to stay at my own place rather than stay at friends' houses or rent a hotel or or rent Airbnb somewhere else.
Awesome. All right. So one of the questions I had was the fact that you're in Brooklyn now. This property's in Detroit. Like, how was that long distance? How did that take managing that?
Yeah, so I had to really kind of think about that process because it's not a smart building by any means. It's a 12-unit condo building. It's kind of small, only 2 stories really, but I had a lockbox kind of configuration where somebody could basically let themselves in once I gave them the lockbox code. And once they were inside, Wi-Fi and all that stuff was pretty simple. I had directions in terms of trash recycling.
Okay.
But Airbnb offers this, it's not a service per se, but this kind of connection where they have a co-host program. Okay. So you kind of send out a message, it goes to local hosts in the area, and then they potentially respond back to you saying like, yeah, I'll help you host your Airbnb space. And so I met with and interviewed a few different people that were kind of looking to help me out. And really the deal is I define like my needs, and then based on those needs, somebody basically takes a cut of your profit. So it's almost like a property management company, but it's more peer-to-peer and all kind of built out through Airbnb. And I know there are like real property management companies that do this for Airbnb places, but I like that idea better. So that's kind of how I figured it out. And I had a few issues here and there, but the co-host was great. They helped turn over the place, clean things, let me know if there were any other issues that I couldn't help facilitate remotely. And ultimately, I had a good experience with my co-host. Unfortunately, as I said, I had to take it down and ultimately just ended that relationship.
That's awesome. So Airbnb basically provided somebody to help you out to manage it in the area while you weren't there.
Pretty much.
You had to interview them and find them out.
Yeah, I didn't want I didn't want to not meet somebody. Like I wanted to meet somebody and make sure that they weren't going to just potentially live at my place. I was giving them a key essentially.
That's a good point. Yeah.
So
they can live there if they paid you.
right.
So tell me, did you ever have a time that you had an issue with the guests where maybe if someone was staying for a weekend or whatever and you had to actually ask them to leave during their stay, maybe because your host saw something?
Yeah. So yeah, unfortunately the reason I had to take it down was because I had a really bad guest experience. So I had a guest come in for a birthday party thinking, and I had a limit of 4 people. It's a 2-bedroom, so I had a very clear limit. I had house rules, like no parties in the house, no smoking in the house. Those rules were broken very quickly. The evening, Friday, they came in on a Friday evening, like at midnight, really Saturday morning, I got a text from my neighbor saying, hey, I'm smelling cigarettes and loud noises are coming from your place. And I'm like, shoot, like that's not good. And then I went to bed saying like I would resolve it in the morning. I got more messages from my neighbors saying like, hey, it's like 2:30 in the morning and they're still up.
Wow.
So I contacted the guest immediately that morning and I said, hey, like I'm hearing these things. This is not allowed. This is not okay. I'm very concerned. They got back to me very quickly. They did, they kind of denied what I was describing. I felt like it was hard to kind of getting these messages from my neighbor, and neighbor's a nice guy. Like we have a decent relationship. There's no issues there. So I found it hard to the fact that she was kind of saying, no, it didn't happen. But I let her stay the rest of the weekend. She said there were no issues. My neighbor said there were no issues the rest of the weekend. So overall, things, I guess, smoothed out, but there were stains on some carpets. There were some things that were broken. But ultimately my neighbor said, and a few other neighbors eventually kind of emailed me saying, hey, we heard about this. This is an issue. We don't want this to happen again. And because I didn't really want to piss off my neighbors, I decided to just take it down and go back to the traditional rental market.
Okay. To that, I mean, you've used Airbnb yourself.
Yeah.
Do you think about your Airbnb rental now when you're going any different than you did before?
I
since
mean,
you've done Airbnb?
Yeah. I definitely try to respect other people's homes or places, even if it's considered an investment property. Like my property is not, I don't consider it an investment property. Yes, I do have rental on it now, and I am making some income from it, but not a substantial amount that I would say like I want to be. I don't want to be a landlord. I really don't. I even thought about selling my place, but right now I didn't want to do that. And so I really do still like the Airbnb platform. I think I had an unfortunate incident, and I did work with Airbnb to try to, provide them with the experience that I had, and they wanted to work with me to figure out how to do better. Really, they couldn't help my neighbors understand or help my neighbors, convince my neighbors that this was a good idea. So my goal was really not to piss off my neighbors. So my goal was to provide people an opportunity to experience Detroit, because I'm a really big Detroit homer. And unfortunately, it was a bad experience for both parties. But at the end of the day, I still continue to use Airbnb when I travel around the country and around the world, to be honest.
So with that, would you, after this tenant leaves, and maybe you can't find a tenant right away or whatever the case is with that situation, but would you use Airbnb again? Would you try it again?
I would try it again. I do think there's some difficulty doing it in a building. I think one of the biggest takeaways I had was just really thinking through that process to allow somebody inside of your home without having to be there. That is a process I think is really important to think through, and I bounce those ideas off co-hosts, I bounce those ideas off friends. I think I even talked to you about it a little bit. And ultimately, I would love to make the building itself smart, so smart that like you can, you just need your phone and Bluetooth and all that good stuff. But I definitely think, I would personally try it again, maybe with a single family home or a smaller building. But I really, I don't foresee myself buying more property at this time, so I don't know if I'll ever have the ability to try it again.
So actually leads to my last question here is that, do you think it's easier to do Airbnb in a complex or an apartment building, for example, like you were in?
Yeah.
Or versus single family homes? So what do you think the positives and negatives would be on that?
I think single family homes are definitely the easiest because you can control pretty much everything. I think if I were to go back, I may talk to my HOA, ultimately the owners of every unit, and say, hey, this is what I'm trying to do. I did talk to a few before I did it, but I didn't talk to all of them. And I would really try to help understand, what are people's concerns. Here's how I'm trying to, resolve your concerns, or here's my plan of attack. But I definitely think having an apartment building, at least the way that condos and HOAs work, maybe if I own the entire complex, that would be different. I think there is opportunity there. But in terms of how the condo association kind of works, I just didn't think it made sense. And so, I don't know, maybe in a few years, we can all get together and figure out how to solve that problem. But for right now, it's just a traditional rental.
Awesome. Well, at least you have a happy ending here so far, that you were able to put it back on the market and get it rented again.
Yep. So Detroit had to thaw out a little bit before I could get it rented. So.
Exactly. Awesome.
All right, so you ready to wrap this up?
Yeah, sure. Let's talk about some of our plugs. Why don't you tell us about yours for this week?
Well, before we do, I think we would just wanted to kind of change it up a little bit. Last week we talked about some books that we reread, but I think moving forward we want to just talk about general resources that we utilize, that we've enjoyed. So a podcast that I listen to all the time is called Listen Money Matters, and actually one of the co-hosts is located here locally in New Jersey, in northern New Jersey. The reason Hoboken. The reason I really like Listen Money Matters is not because it's about money. Actually, it's really about just practical advice in terms of money related things, but those things range from pretty straightforward, like savings, debt elimination. They talk about like mortgages a lot, things like that. But also they talk about practical like goal setting and how to improve your ability to succeed at your day job. And money is involved in your day job. You get paid for that. And so I think it's a really great podcast. I've been listening to it for a while, and I would recommend it. What about you?
So it's not one specific podcast. There's a guy, Grant Cardone. He has multiple different podcasts. He actually does one episode every day for a different podcast.
Wow.
So it's like one a week, but he's got 5 or 6 podcasts.
That's a ton.
That he's running off of. Yeah. I listen to him. He's basically a successful real estate investor. And I mostly really listen to him, though, for the motivation. He's just the motivational guy. Stop making excuses. Basically get off your butt and go make these investments. And sometimes, when he talks about it, a lot of people wonder, I don't have enough money right now to buy real estate. And that's a really big problem. And, I even, have that problem as well.
We talked about that.
So it's, how can you do better in your job? Like, how can you make more money now to be able to save money? And sometimes the best thing is not taking the money and buying a property. It's actually taking the money and reinvesting it in yourself, which allows yourself to be able to make more money to then save money. He talks a lot about that. It's a kind of a different approach than the normal, education that you get, because he's just a really high energy kind of person. And honestly, I try to listen to, I go for, a walk in the morning to like kind of start my day. And I listen to him in the morning just to get myself fired up for the day.
Nice.
So.
Cool. We just wanted to touch on 2 quick things before we wrap up. So first is we got some great feedback from some coworkers and friends of ours.
Yep.
So, we're definitely trying to improve here. So hopefully the audio quality of the video is improved. Hopefully our editing is better. And hopefully just a little bit more organized here. So we definitely spent some time coming up with an outline, things like that. Second, we've kind of been building out some other ways to kind of connect with us. So we came up with an email address. So it's hustleestate1, the number 1, @gmail.com. So you can email us there. My Twitter handle is Isaac Gilman. So check me out there. But really, I think, really why we started this was really to plug your website. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I recently created a website at hendrickson.com. I've had the domain name for a little bit now, but what it is, it's just a website about what I'm doing. So it talks about who I am and what I do for a living. It talks about my services that I offer.
And what are those 3 services that you offer?
My services at hard money. So if you need a real estate loan to do a fix and flip, give me a call. Doesn't have to be for a flip, but for investment purposes. I purchase properties for people at sheriff sales, so I go on their behalf and buy property for them. And then the last option is just as I do my real estate license, so I work with investors trying to find properties outside of a private market, such as sheriff sales.
Cool. All right.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's all we got for this week, or this episode, I should say.
Yep.
Hopefully, we'll try to put these out every 2 weeks or so, and hopefully any feedback you guys have for us, or any feedback that anyone has for us, we greatly appreciate. So thank you for your time, and have a great day.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.